everybody. Hey, if we haven't met yet, my name is Josh. I'm the pastor here at Church on the Drive. You ventured out on a cold day like this, man. I'm proud of you. You should be proud of you too. And if you're joining us online, we're proud you're here too. Hey, we're in a series right now that we're calling Be a Light. And before I say anything else, I want to say this. I'm proud of you because some of you in this room, you don't know it, but you just learned to like a country song just now. Technically, Chris Tomlin sings it with Thomas. It's a great song. Talking about Be a Light, right? So we are in a series right now called Be a Light. And this whole idea stems from Jesus looking at his followers, at his disciples, the ones who walked with him and traveled with him and knew him, and the ones who kind of laid down their mat at night out in the woods somewhere as they all fell asleep, right? The ones who saw him around the campfire, heard all of his teachings. He looked at them and he said, "You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world." And that extends to us today, that we, who are followers of Jesus, Jesus looks at us and says, "You are the light of the world." And I don't know about you, but that seems like a lot of responsibility to me. That's a lot of stuff that comes with it, isn't it? There's so much that comes with that because anytime you have great responsibility, there's great expectations that come with that. Last week, we kicked this off by saying this. We said, you need to live your faith so others can see the light, right? Because you're the light of the world, that means people are looking at you. And if you want other people to enjoy the light of God, this light of Jesus, you have to live your faith in a way that makes it possible for them to see the light. So many of us, we go throughout our life as followers of Jesus, and we just kind of do our thing, and we want to keep it quiet. We don't really want to talk about it too much. We live in a society that kind of encourages that approach, but it's hard for people to see the light if you're not living your faith out in a way that they can see the light. So there's kind of two sides to that. On the one hand, you need to live openly enough that people can see your faith and can see Jesus through you. On the other, when you're living your faith openly, you need to make sure you're doing it well and not like a big old jerk, right? You don't want to make God look bad as you're going through this whole thing. Yeah, living your faith so others can see the light hopefully brings others to God, because it's not your light necessarily that they're seeing, right? Jesus is the source of the light, and kind of like a sun and moon situation, Jesus is the sun, we're the moon, we're reflecting it back to God and back to all of creation is the idea. I was having a conversation with some friends recently, and we're talking a little bit about those people who never hear about Jesus, right? Like they never hear about Jesus, and one of them turned to me and they said, "Hey, what do you think happens to those people who never hear about Jesus? Who never hear, or maybe more to the point, never get a great representation of who Jesus actually is. Maybe you're born in a part of the world where there's this real distorted view of who Jesus is. There's this real misunderstanding of who Jesus is, and because Jesus is associated with the West or America, and like people in that part of the world may hate the West or America, like there's this really convoluted understanding of who Jesus is." My friends looked at me and they said, what do you think? You're a pastor. What do you think happens to those people? So I did what anybody does in that situation. I quoted a college professor I had. His name is Dr. Leroy Kemp. And Dr. Kemp said this to us one time. He said, "You are responsible for the amount of light you've been shown." Sounds pretty good, right? I mean, how can I be responsible for something I don't know about, I haven't seen? Even Paul says, how can they know if nobody preaches them? How can they hear if nobody comes to be a preacher to them? And so my friend wisely responded back to me and said, if that's the truth, and I think it is, then why do we tell anybody about Jesus at all? Why do we evangelize, or why do we do that sort of thing at all? Because if we never tell them about Jesus, then one day when they die and they get to those pearly gates, God's going to let them in because they're only responsible for the amount of light they've been shown, right? Well, there's obvious issues with that approach. Number one, Jesus said, "Go into all the world and tell them." So we'd be violating that commandment. Number two, if the disciples, the original followers of Jesus, had taken that approach and had that belief, you and I wouldn't be sitting here 2,000 years later. We would have never heard about Jesus. The movement around Jesus would have died out a long, long time ago. But beyond that, I truly believe this, that when we start following Jesus, we step into this eternal thing that's happening. And our life with Jesus, it doesn't wait till we die. It's now. It begins now. The kingdom of God is now, the moment we say yes to Christ. And we start living as if that kingdom has already come. And friends, I got news for you. Following Jesus is the best way to live and will make you better at life. I want that for everybody. I think it's the best possible news for everyone I come across. And so, yeah, it might be harder in certain parts of the world, and it might cause a little friction, and it might cause real hardship, but I still think it's the best way to live and will make them better at life. I think it's ultimately what will inspire them to live God-honoring lives, lives that truly bring them joy. But I know for some people that might not be as true. In fact, this idea that we should just let people believe whatever they want to believe, it's kind of a common postmodern trope, right? Like, you believe what you want to believe, I'll believe what I want to believe, and we all have our truths. None of us has a single idea about what the real truth is, and so ultimately, all road leads to the same place, right? So if you're religious or spiritual, the idea is that all religions are equally valuable and will ultimately lead you to the same place. And if God is out there, then God is merciful and God is good and understands that we don't all have a great picture fully, and so won't hold it against us. And that somehow we're all reaching and grabbing the same thing. If you're not religious, if you're more secular than that, not spiritual, then you still kind of end up in the same place because we all die. That's the idea. But to me, that leads to a lot of dim, a lot of darkness. There's a lack of clarity, right? Because we can't all be, right? Like, if you're a true follower of Jesus, then you understand Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the light. No one comes to the Father except through me. You understand sayings and phrases like that to say, okay, well, there's something a little bit exclusive here. There's something a little bit exclusive at the very least. How do we do this? How does this work out? And if everybody's right, then nobody's right. Yeah, there's a lack of clarity, lack of dimness. But the point of the light is to provide clarity. Right? When you turn on a light in a room, you're not just doing that because you like the way it looks all the time. You're doing that so you can see and so you don't step on the Legos that your kids left out that night. Right? You're doing this so you can see stuff. When you have a flashlight on the side of your house because you're hearing something weird, right? Like, you don't have the flashlight on just because you like the way it looks. You want to see what's out there. It brings clarity and it brings vision. So when he started off his biography about Jesus, this guy named John, one of Jesus' earliest followers, said this about him in terms of light. He said, in him, talking about Jesus, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Now, he started talking about how Jesus was this, the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all of this. And so he's talking about creation and how it starts there with creation. And if you were to just read this verse right here, and you came across it in the first part of John's biography about Jesus, you might be a little stumped, because it's a weird turn of phrase. And I'll level with you. I've been reading the Bible a long time, and I've been diving into commentaries and doing all that stuff for a long time. This is still a weird turn of phrase, and it's meant to be. It carries a lot of stuff with it. So let me help a little bit. So when we're talking about Jesus being life, and that life was the light of all mankind, what we're saying he's trying to convey is that Jesus is the creator and sustainer of life. All life, in him, by him, through him. Anything that's ever been created was done through him. And this isn't just John saying this. This isn't Christians adding this in later, much later, right? The Apostle Paul writes this in Colossians and says other things like this. This was a commonly held Christian belief from the beginning. This was a commonly held understanding, presumably because Jesus said it. But John says, in him was this life. Everything that comes to be is through him. And that life was the light of all mankind. It's this life that God brings that illuminates things for us. It's this sustainer, this creator of life is what illuminates things, makes things more clear and visible to us. Which makes sense, doesn't it? Like, in a logical sense. If you and I were out with some friends and we were out in the woods somewhere, for instance. Say we went camping out way in the sticks somewhere. And we got together. One of the first things we would do is we'd get our shelter together. And then we'd start a fire. And hopefully one of us knew how to do it. All right, we'd start that fire, we'd get it going, and we'd have it right there. Imagine that picturesque scene where we got the fire going and we got the marshmallows out and we're singing Kumbaya and all that good stuff. And then I said, hey, let's go out over here. And we got up away from the fire and we walked away from the fire. Well, away from the fire, it's dark, isn't it? It's not as bright. You can't see as much. It's maybe even a little bit colder. You know, the further you get away from that fire, the darker it's going to be and the less you're going to be able to see. And the same is true, according to John. The same is going to be true the further we get away from the author, creator, and sustainer of life. If the author, creator, and sustainer of life is the source of the light of all mankind, then the further we get away from that author, creator, sustainer, the darker it's going to be. And I think some of us, we understand that. We've lived that in our own life. That the further I got away from God, in the times that I've gotten furthest away of God, the darker, the more confusing it has been. In the times when I felt closest with God, the more clarity I seem to have. So, when Jesus was pointed out by another religious leader of the day, a guy named John, he was pointed at as the chosen one, like the one who was coming to set everything right. The Jews that Jesus, this group that Jesus was a part of, they believed that a Messiah, a chosen one, was coming for years and years and years. And they prayed and they waited and they hoped and they were waiting and waiting and waiting. And their father had prayed for this and their father's father and their father's father's father and the grandmothers. They'd all been praying and waiting. Well, this religious leader, John, looks up one day and says, I'm not the one, but I know who is, and there he is. There he is. Well, this religious leader had his own students, his own disciples, and they took note of this. They took note of this, and they saw Jesus, and this is what happened. When the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Not just like they said the sinner's prayer and walked the aisle and decided to make a commitment of faith, right? They actually physically followed him from the place where they were. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asked, what do you want? I love that. Right? We've all been there. Somebody's following. What do you want, man? Leave me alone. What is it that you want? What is it that you want? And these followers of Jesus, or these followers of John, said, hey, I want to come see where you're at. Where are you staying? It's a simple question. Where are you staying? But they're not asking, like, are you staying at the Super 8 motel or at the Hyatt? Which one is it? Like, and Jesus isn't looking to answer that question. They say, where are you staying? And what they want to know is, can we come and hang out with you and see if you really are who John believes you to be? That's what they're really after. And so Jesus looks back at him and he says, come and you will see. Come and you will see. Come see what's going on here. This is him letting them know they're about to get more than they ever bargained for. They're about to see more clearly than they have ever seen in their entire life. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's not just Jesus that says this. See, what's interesting is that this phrase, come and see, almost immediately gets passed on to Jesus' followers. Because this is one day, but the next day, Jesus walks around and he sees another guy named Philip. And he looks at Philip and he says, Philip, come follow me. Come follow me, Philip. And Philip says, okay. Philip is convinced that this Jesus guy is who everybody thinks he is, at least who John thinks he is. Philip is convinced. Now, we don't know why Philip is sitting there. We can presume a few things, I think. We can maybe understand that Philip might have been one of the disciples of John. At the very least, he's there to see what's going on with John, because they were out in the wilderness somewhere, and there was no other reason to be there unless you were there for what John was offering. But Philip says, yeah, I'm going to follow you. And Philip does what I think every single one of us would do once we found something that we thought was undeniably good. He goes and he finds the best, most high integrity person he knows, and he tells him about it. Think about it. When you find something that's incredible, what do? You text a friend. You call a friend. You go knock on the next door. Have you heard about this thing? Did you see this meme? Let me send you this TikTok, right? All of that stuff. We want to share these things. So Philip finds the best person he knows is a guy named Nathaniel. And here's what Philip does. Philip found Nathaniel and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law. You can just sense him being so amped about this. And about whom the prophets also wrote. Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. We found him. He's here. It's the guy. I can't believe it. Everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be awesome. But Nathaniel doesn't reciprocate his enthusiasm. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Like, what a buzzkill, right? What a buzzkill. What a lame dude. Are you serious? He says, Nazareth? Nothing good comes from Nazareth. There's nobody out there. And then people are backwards. I don't even think they can read. They got that weird accent. Nobody wants to hear that either. Now, a lot of us face what I think is a similar conversation when we start talking about Jesus outside of this place. Except instead of Nazareth, replace the word Nazareth with church or Christians. You realize how many people you know have walked away from church in the last 25 years? I think the number I read recently was 40 million. Millions of people walking away from church in the last 25 years. More people have walked away from church, an institutionalized faith like this, in the last 25 years than the first and second Great Awakenings combined had people joining the church. It's an amazing number. Incredible number. And the reason many of them will tell you is because of church hurt. And so for them, it's not Nazareth, can anything good come from there? It's church, can anything good come from there? Can anything good come from Christians? I don't know, man. I don't know. How can it be true if there are these real followers of Jesus out there? And can Jesus really be good if all of his kids act like that? And I think the tack that you and I have to take when we talk about our faith, if you're a follower of Jesus, is the same tack that Philip uses here with the best person he knows. Come and see. Come and see. You remember Jesus started off like that? Come and you will see. And here's Philip. Come and see. Come and see what's going on. Friend, you need to go be a light, and you need to tell others, and you need to bring people to the light. But at the end of the day, it's not your responsibility to make somebody else a Jesus follower. God will do that. God will bring them into the fold. Your job is to show them the light. Your job is to let them know and to bring them to the light. And you don't have to have all the greatest theological arguments. You don't have to know what the hypostatic union is or how many angels can fit on the top of a needle. All you have to know is your story. When you say things like come and see, you say, look, I know what God did for me. Let me tell you about it. Come and see what God can do in your life. And then let God take care of the rest. We want to invite. We don't want to sit back and not do anything. But the real work of the Spirit and of the heart, that's God's work. And it doesn't just stay here with Philip, by the way, and Nathaniel. It goes on beyond Jesus and beyond his disciples. We find out later as they're walking around, one day Jesus and his disciples, after the 12 have kind of been solidified, and there's a few others following them around, Jesus has to go through an area called Samaria. And if you don't know much about the ancient world, you can know this. Jews and Samaritans did not get along, did not like each other on a cultural level, on an ethnic level, on a religious level. They did not like each other. They did not get along. But Jesus says, we got to go through Samaria. Jews usually went all the way around Samaria, so they didn't have to go in there. Well, on their way, they stop at this well, an old, ancient well called Jacob's Well. And he stops there and he sends his disciples along. He says, y'all go get some food, go get supplies. I'll hang here for a little bit. It's hot out here. It was about noon, the hottest part of the day at that time. You don't want to be out doing anything at that point. And there's nobody supposed to be coming up to the well anyway, so he can just be alone. Except there was this lady, this Samaritan lady, who walked out to the well to get her water at noon. This didn't happen because it was the hottest part of the day. You would come early in the morning and later in the evening when it wasn't hot. And what we can kind of surmise is that she had to come at noon. She was probably an outcast, probably alone, didn't really want people, other people didn't really want her around. There's a good chance she was looked down on by the rest of her little city right there. So she comes to draw water, and Jesus looks at her and says, hey, can I have a drink? And she says, excuse me? He said, can I have a drink? And she goes, how are you, a Jew, going to talk to me, a Samaritan woman, all alone out here and ask me for a drink? Y'all don't like us, and we don't like you. Also, I'm a lady. You can't talk to me alone. Jesus says, well, if you knew who was asking you for water, not only would you give me some water, but you would have asked me for the everlasting living water that I can give you. And she says, living water? He goes, yeah, water that you'll never thirst again. Water that starts out within you and just kind of stays there, and it's an everlasting spring. You'll never be thirsty again. She says, well, give me some of that water. I don't have to come back out here. This is the pain. I don't want to do this. And Jesus says, well, okay, go call your husband and come back. And she says, I don't have a husband. This is where things get interesting, because Jesus looks at her and says, you're right. And the guy you're with right now isn't your husband either. He's your kind of your partner, but he's not your husband. And the fact is, you've had 5 husbands. Isn't that right? This was a big no-no in the ancient world. It's normal in Vegas today, but it's a big no-no in that world. He says, you've had 5 husbands. And now we see why she might have been out at this well in the middle of the day by herself. She doesn't want to leave it there. And so she turns it into this religious, ethnic, cultural argument now. And she says, well, you know what? I can see that you're a prophet. So I don't understand why you Jews don't worship here where you're supposed to worship. If you're a prophet, you should know that. You tell everybody they need to worship in Jerusalem. And Jesus kind of just puts the kibosh on it and says, look, there's a time coming when everybody's going to know how to worship. You're going to worship in spirit and truth. This woman is amazed by what's going on. And about that time, Jesus' disciples come back and they say, Jesus, what's going on here? Like, are you all right? Is everything good? And the lady just kind of drops her jar and goes running back to the town where she's from. Probably not too far away. Goes running back. Look what she says. Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? There it is again. Come and see. Like, Jesus brings clarity and vision into her life. Like he illuminates things in her life, helps her understand what things are really about, draws her closer. And her only response is to go find the people around her and say, come and see. Her only response is to go tell other people about this guy that's bringing clarity into her life, illumination into her life. That's what it is, y'all. That's what we're talking about. When we talk about the sharing of our faith, when we talk about being a light in the world, when we talk about what it might mean to be a light outside of this place, and not just sing songs from Z88 in our car, and that be the extent of our Christianity outside of these church walls. Here's kind of the bottom line I want to leave you with today. We help others see when we invite them to the light. Again, if we're out in the woods somewhere and say you're walking around in the dark and you don't know where you're going, you don't have a flashlight, the best thing I can do is say, hey, come over here, get by the fire with us. At least you can see then. There's a lot of people we need to wave over to the fire. A lot of people we need to turn the light on for. Because we help others see when we invite them to the light. We are not the light. Jesus is. We just get to reflect that light back out into the world. I think it's fitting that we're getting to talk about being a light the day before our country commemorates Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday tomorrow. He was one of these great light bearers in history. I think if you look throughout the ages, there are these people that you would call like a light bearer, somebody who comes and brings clarity and vision to the people that they're around. And I think it's probably almost universally acknowledged that he was one of those people. As you might know, Martin Luther King was a Christian minister, and he got a lot of his teaching, a lot of his stuff was founded from the Bible and his belief in Jesus and what he believed Jesus taught about things that he found in Scripture. Now, he received threats all the time, didn't he? He received threats all the time. Not only did he receive threats, his family received threats. And not only did his family and he receive threats, his friends and anybody who was associated with him and acquainted with him received threats on their life and on their property. But he kept going. He kept going. Whatever the light is, it's not timid. It's not scared. Never has been, never should be, never will. The light isn't scared. Why? Why would the light be afraid of the darkness? The light comes on, the darkness retreats. This is what Paul talks about in a letter to one of his followers. He said, the Spirit God has given us is not one of timidity. It's of power, love, and discipline. God's with us. We're good to go. The trouble for a lot of us is we get nervous. We get nervous about the darkness around us. And sometimes we allow ourselves to give in to that darkness. Look, when you look around the world, what you need to do is you need to understand that light drives out the darkness. If you want the world to be a better place, if you want the world to be more what God intended and what Jesus seemed to push us towards, you have to invite others to the light. Because even Martin Luther King said it this way, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. That's it. Only light can drive out the darkness. So when you look around, don't try to take on the attributes and the tactics of the darkness. Be a person of light. Be a light wherever you find yourself. Invite people to the light. You might be saying, well, how do I do that? I don't even know where to begin. Let me give you 3 things I think you can do. The first is this. Open your mouth. That's it. Like, we get involved in a situation, we just, I'm afraid to talk. Let me give you permission. You can talk about Jesus. There you go. If you needed somebody to do it, there you go. Open your mouth. You got to be willing to open your mouth. Here's the second thing. Live God's values. Live God's values. Right? Opening your mouth and talking about Jesus is great, but you also have to live it out. Your life should be its own sermon. Your life should be its own argument for who Jesus is and who Jesus can be in somebody else's life. But as you're doing that, I want to warn you, you need to also be ready to speak. I know some of you, you're not extroverted and you don't feel confident in speaking publicly or about anything in depth. You want to really take your time, and I understand that that's who you are. I get it. But you also need to be ready to speak, because there's going to come opportunities for you to talk about who Jesus has been in your life. Again, nobody's asking you to memorize a theological textbook and have all the answers. Nobody's asking you to go pick up your Bible and memorize a thing from cover to cover. What you need to do, though, is understand why you believe what you believe and understand what God has done in your life. Why are you part of this thing? And then you need to be able to convey that to other people so that you can invite them, so you can say, come and see. Because as dark as this world seems sometimes, as dark as it can be in your own life and in the lives of those you know, I've got great, great news for you and for everybody you ever met. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In the end, Jesus always wins. The darkness will not overcome him. It will not overcome you. It will not overcome this world. Would you let me pray for you? Lord, I thank you. I thank you that you gave us a way. I thank you that you showed us what the light is. I thank you that when we were wandering away in the darkness, you called us over and you said, hey, come into the light where you can actually see this. Lord, I just pray this morning that you would help everybody listening to the sound of my voice to do the same. Whether they need to be called into the light to be with you and see things clearly, or whether, like me, they need to also be inviting others over to the light. God, help us. Help us to understand. Help us to understand and to put into practice this idea that it's our job to invite others to you and then let you do the rest. Lord, help us to be a light. It's in the name of your Son.